I hope you've had a chance to listen to part one of this interview on Biz Bites. Stay tuned now for part two. Welcome to Biz Bites, brought to you by Com Together, helping businesses like yours build their brand through telling amazing stories to engage and grow audiences on multiple platforms. I wanted to take a little bit of a different tack now for a moment. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your background
Yes.
and where it all started for you, because I know you sort of talked about the business starting with your mum, and I know it's become a bit of a family business. But take me back to how did you go when you were in school or in university? Where did you go? Where was the idea of where you were going at that point?
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. I think I always had a connection to doing something with people. For when I think back to when I was in year 9, year 10, doing work experience, I thought family law was the place that I wanted to be. And I actually did my work experience with a family lawyer, and I got a bit of a taste of that environment. And I thought, well, I'm not sure whether this is it, actually. And so I always had a passion for presenting and training, always enjoyed, standing up and giving a lesson. In fact, I think when I was a child, I used to be one of those kids that got all the cousins together and we'd put on a performance for all the relatives, so I've always been interested in training and performing and educating and inspiring. And so to be honest with you, it was a bit of an interesting thing that sent me into selling, because years and years ago, my mum, Teresa, actually had a very successful nutrimetics business. For anyone who doesn't remember nutrimetics or know of nutrimetics, it's a direct selling skincare range. And so mum built a team of some 275 people in her downline, and I used to attend all of the meetings and see all the cosmetics. And one day I decided to take her kit to school, and I started doing a demonstration at school, and I did some parties for my friends' mums, and I actually became a sales leader at 14 years old with nutrimetics.
Wow.
So and I achieved some pretty great results, doing that. So I sort of had a bit of a knack for selling and the sales process very early on. And that sort of went away for a little while, and I studied some other areas. I was very interested in org psych and HR, and then fell into business to business sales role, and then started developing my career from there. So it's been a bit of an interesting journey, but I think underneath all of that, the sales process and the presenting and training has always been a bit of a passion, consciously and unconsciously.
I'm going to say, well, there are probably two things come out there. Firstly, I mean, I know the big influence that your mum was obviously had on you, and in establishing the business, and obviously you got your brother in the business as well these days, and I think that having family around you and the influence that has is also it gives you a different perspective on business and the way that you talk to people and listen to people, doesn't it?
I think so, yes. And I won't say that it's always easy, because there's a whole, when we talk about the different psychologies and being influential and those sorts of things, I think there's probably a lot of family business people that are out there that can relate to this. There's a whole brand new mindset that needs to come when you actually work with family and friends, because there are certain I would say areas where you need to be honest and to call people on things when they're not necessarily doing what's been agreed to or what have you. And I think when you add a family dynamic on top of that, then it can sometimes be challenging for people to be open and honest, or if they don't have the right mindset. And so that's been a great journey, particularly for myself and Paul, who's our GM, and being able to really work together for what's in the best interests of the business, but also have a separate relationship as brother and sister. And so, that's been a great learning curve for both of us as well. And we're really glad that we've gone on that journey as well.
I know it. I know how interesting that can be. My daughter in the last year or so has been doing some work with me, and there's certain points where we have that. Okay, we're going to be serious now. We're going to have this relationship, and then you've got to be very clear when you're turning that off and going, okay, we're now no longer work. We're going to have some fun. because it is, I grew up with my parents both worked together
Yes, great.
for
So you're
many,
very
many
familiar
years.
with family business.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I always found that interesting dynamic because my parents' business, my dad was a pharmacist, so my mum was working in the pharmacy and looking after things there. But as a qualified pharmacist, it was my dad's business. Yet very clearly outside of the business, my mum was running everything. So and still does. So but it is interesting how those dynamics have to work to do that. But I love also as well that you sort of, I guess that whole idea that now you also do a lot of motivational speaking and things as well, right? That's a big part of what you do. And I can see that obviously started at a very early age, right? I can imagine the 15-year-old Chandell out there in front of everybody, and that sort of transferred across onto the stage now.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think, I'll tell you an interesting story. So I've always been comfortable, on a stage. So I think family and friends would joke that it's like, give me a microphone or give me a stage and I'm the happiest ever. But I think I never really experienced what a lot of people would call stage fright, if you like, and a few years back, I actually did some coaching with a lady who was a keynote speaker. She'd written a book and she wanted to be able to go and do presentations on stage to promote her book. And we have a program called Sell from Stage that we teach. And so in my diagnostics with her and attempting to find out from her where the reservation was and what happens to her that she gets so anxious and fearful about being on a stage, she started to describe to me all of these different sensations going on in her body and, sort of butterflies or movement in her diaphragm or stomach and, sort of this feeling of wanting to move and what have you. And as she was describing all of it to me, I realized that I had all the same sensations when I go out to go and present to a group of people, but the label that I assigned to it wasn't stage fright or anxiety. It was excitement and, anticipation and looking forward to that. And so I think it's really interesting. We were talking about mindset a minute ago, and I think that the way that we label our experiences can also make a difference to how much we enjoy something or how much we dislike it. And so I think I've always had that excitement, that anticipation to, get out there and share knowledge or even, when I think back to, I did dancing as a teenager as well. And, that art of performance and, just entertaining people as part of that. Obviously now we do edutainment rather than just entertainment, but it's certainly a big passion. And I think it's been there for a very long time.
Yeah, and I love that idea that it is the way you address things, and it goes with that thing we were talking about earlier about sort of the version of imposter syndrome, and I love your little itty bitty shitty committee that's sitting there as well, because all of these things contribute to the way you approach something. And I know, I have a daughter who's a performer, and she is on stage, no nerves, loves it, goes into it, no problems, but she's had a massive problem ever doing exams. She can't do exams. And it's really interesting because there's a different mindset to it. And it's sometimes it's not as easy necessarily always for everyone to transform that, but it is about the way you think about things and the way you go into it, because it is so easy to go one way or the other. I know how many people, how many people have joked over the years about the fact that they'd, when it comes to a funeral, that they'd rather be in the coffin than speaking at it. And it's really quite, that always quite amazes me, that's, people get so afraid of speaking. And even in terms of the podcast that we're doing now, the amount of people that I've had conversations with, and one I know just yesterday with someone who was having a very lovely phone conversation, said, "Oh, I'm really not sure about being a guest and everything." And I said, "But we've just been having a conversation and it's exactly the same, but yet there's a mindset twist that happens."
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's what is most interesting to me about that, Anthony, is that I think it's much more easily overcome than a lot of people will allow them to imagine. You can make changes as far as someone going from complete nerves and anxiety, the inability to actually speak because of that, to actually being a confident presenter, to be able to have a confident conversation with someone. And it's nowhere near as hard as what a lot of people think it is. So
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Although I'd have to say that there are people that do it really well. I think that's one of the differences that can be that there's one thing is the nerves. There's another thing that some people that when they're out there and they're speaking, it's just you sit there kind of in awe and with the way that they can deliver something. And I think that's what's, really impressive about, I know the way that you deliver things and the videos and things that I see all the time coming up of your stuff, and anyone that hasn't followed you should definitely follow you, because I think it's that confidence that comes across as well that is really important. But knowing your stuff, I mean, I think clearly that's what we've discussed. Some of the things you had today is there's such an array of experience that you've got there, and taking that and turning that into these things is where the skill lies.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And yeah, it's been absolutely fantastic to be able to share some of those things with you today.
Yeah, and I just before we finish up, I just wanted to ask you a couple of quick questions. And one of them is because you cover a vast array of things, you've got a number of sales programs and variations of them. You've got your motivational speaking, and you've got these other the neuro-linguistic side of things as well. So how does all of that piece together for you in what you're doing?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. So our business has had, I mean, it's nearly 20 years that we've been around doing what we're doing. And so our business has had a few evolutions in that time in terms of, what our key offerings were. And the solid piece here is around the fact that we generally are working with people in the context of communication, sales, or in the context of leadership. And believe it or not, leadership is a lot of selling, because you're needing to, instead of selling to external clients, you're selling to your internal team, to your upline stakeholders, even sometimes to external partners as well. And so we often will work with people in programs over time. And I'm a big believer in the fact that you don't just learn something and without implementation, it's not really actually knowing it. And so we work with people over time. But we have a couple of different ways in which people can engage with us, because we totally appreciate that, sometimes people's skills are at different levels. So one of the best things to do to engage with us, though, is to read my book, because there's a lot of elements in there around mindset, human behavior, and I'll make sure that I get that link to you if anybody would like to grab an audio version of it on us.
Oh, lovely. And I definitely will include lots of information in the show notes of how people can get a hold of all of those things. So we look forward to sharing that. And so just to wrap things up, I always like to ask guests, what is one thing that you wish everybody knew in advance, that they find out an aha moment when they start working with you, that you wish that more people would know they're going to have that before?
Oh, there's a couple of things, but the first one that came to mind is the one that I'll share. So I talked a little bit before about my challenges with mental health and how that sort of, in a roundabout way took me on this trajectory to where we are today. And I think the one thing that I wish that everybody knew, and that they often will find out very quickly as they start working with myself and the other coaches at Life Puzzle, is that you're in charge of your mind and therefore your results. And so while we may not always be able to control the things that happen outside, we always have a choice around the meaning that we assign, and that can be empowering or disempowering. And so a simple way of saying that is that I can't control the wind, but I can absolutely adjust my sails. And when people recognize this, it doesn't matter what challenge or what situation they're faced with in any context, they have more resources to be able to adapt and to overcome, because they recognize that they're pulling their power back rather than actually giving it to someone else, or being at the effect or a victim to a situation or a person or a circumstance. So you are in charge of your mind and therefore your results, just the same way that I'm in charge of my mind and therefore my results too. So that's what I'd love for everybody to embrace.
Fantastic. I absolutely love that. And I know there's so many topics and so many things. We're going to absolutely have to do this again at some stage soon because there's a lot to explore. But I really appreciate your time and taking us a little bit through your own journey as well, because I think that's understanding what makes people like yourself tick really empowers others to go on that journey with you. And I definitely encourage people, as I said, we'll include lots of information in the show notes, encouraging people to follow you on LinkedIn in particular and get a hold of the book, because I think it'll make a huge difference to a lot of people.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. I've had an absolute ball. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Chandell, and everyone stay tuned for the next episode of Biz Bites. Biz Bites is brought to you by ComTogether for all your marketing needs so you can build your brand, engage audiences on multiple platforms. Go to comtogether.com.au, follow the links to book an appointment for a free consultation.